Hi, everyone. My name is Clinton Johnson. I use he, him pronouns, and I lead Esri's Racial Equity and Social Justice Unified team. Over the past few years, Esri and the NAACP have been working together to help bring the power of digital geography into your work to advance racial justice. Your work is place-based. You're out there working in different communities, identifying and addressing many overlapping and intersecting challenges. So you need location-aware tools to help you to engage, to strategize, to plan, to act, and to assess your impact. So our work together is taking shape under the concept of mapping the movement. This idea includes mapping to explore present and pressing issues and mapping to design a racially just future. So when you hear mapping the movement, you can expect capabilities that'll help you to map progress, to map opportunities to improve your strategies and to increase your impact. You can also think about using mapping to enable the next generation of leaders and mapping to increase community awareness and engagement. And through your GIS, the association will have access to location data, analytics, and more, all to help you to apply intersectional equity lenses, explore root causes and predict policy impacts, and to take a systematic data-driven approach to advancing racial justice. And today you'll learn more about that systematic approach. More specifically, it's a geographic approach. Community engagement is at the center of this racial equity and social justice workflow, recognizing and supporting your need to engage communities at every stage of your work. Taking a geographic approach means beginning by mapping and analyzing equity, using maps and location analytics to identify barriers, communities, and opportunities. Then comes operationalizing positive practices, where you map alternatives to policies and to action and use GIS to enable your interventions. And next, you'll move on to a phase of continuous improvement where you'll manage performance. And in this phase, assess your impact and identify gaps, and prepare to move through this cycle again and again to ensure increasingly more equitable and just outcomes. The association is working to leverage the full breadth of geospatial capabilities to advance racial justice for Black communities and other marginalized racial groups. You're working to understand the distribution of benefits, burdens, and prosperity. So you need to manage valuable data resources that help you understand where there are barriers to prosperity and where there are opportunities to increase equity. Use your GIS for mapping, visualization, and analytics to assess conditions, reveal patterns, and find opportunities to improve outcomes. Use your GIS for data management to collect, organize, and maintain accurate locations and details about community assets, community resources, and community conditions. You're constantly working to find the best places to deploy your incredible interventions and where to focus your work on policy change and which issues to focus on in which communities. Use your GIS for designing and planning. Map and evaluate alternative scenarios and create optimal designs. Use your GIS for field mobility. Manage and enable mobile teams to access information anywhere and collect information while they're out in communities. You're constantly assessing your impact and redirecting resources accordingly. You need to understand where your efforts are having impact and where there are opportunities to close more gaps. Use your GIS to track, manage, and monitor the situation out in communities and gain real-time insights. Use your GIS for decision support, gain situational awareness, enable information-driven decision-making, and enable more equitable choices. You seek the best ways to engage communities as equal partners. You work to understand which and where communities need more engagement, where they're experiencing disparities, and where they're feeling exclusion and burdens. Use your GIS for constituent engagement. Communicate and collaborate with community members and external partners. Use your GIS for sharing and collaboration. Empower everyone in the NAACP network to discover, use, make, and share maps and other geographic information when and where it matters. And all of these capabilities become available to you as you use a geographic approach to advance racial justice. Now, a few of my colleagues are going to demonstrate just how you can begin to take a geographic approach to racial justice.
Thanks, Clinton. I'm really excited to show you how we can take 5 simple maps, analyze them to understand patterns and create a common understanding. Education is often used as a tool to get out of poverty, increase earning potential, and create stability. We can probably think about our own personal journey through school. What we're looking at is a map showing the locations of schools across Jefferson County, Kentucky. At this point, these are just places on the maps. Let's say, for example, your organization was passionate about education in low-income Black and Brown communities and wanted to invest. So you've been tasked with identifying potential opportunities. Now, we're going to walk through an example of how to do just that. Right now, we're looking at schools that seem to be evenly distributed, but now we need to find low-income Black and Brown communities. So let's look at the distribution of communities by race. This is a predominance map showing race by census tract. In yellow, it's predominantly a Black community. In green, it's predominantly Hispanic. In brown, it's predominantly a white community. Now, when looking across the map, we can see that the Black and Brown communities appear to be smaller or more concentrated than white communities throughout the county. Let's move on to income. We're looking at the median household income. Areas in darker blue have the highest income, while areas in darker green have the lowest income. A quick recap. We've just looked at the distribution of race and the distribution of income separately. Now let's take a look at the relationship between race and income. Here we've combined race and income. On this map, we're looking at Black median household income. There's a couple things going on here, shading and intensity. So incomes go from dark purple to light purple, so that's from high to low. The dark purple areas are Black communities with the highest income. Householders in this area earn 6 figures, while the light purple areas have lower incomes. Householders in this area earn about $28,000 per year. Up to this point, we've looked at our distribution of schools and the relationship between race and income. This allows us to identify the schools in low-income Black and Brown communities where there's the greatest need and opportunity to invest, based on 2 factors, race and income. But ultimately, what outcomes are we trying to improve for these communities? This could be inclusive economic development, increased levels of education for Black and Latinx communities, or higher incomes. We won't get into this here, but we could take a deeper dive and create equity index layers to get some perspective around interventions and outcomes. Now let's take a look at poverty status. We'll use poverty status as a proxy to assess opportunities and create a common understanding. The dark purple areas have the highest poverty rates. Based on these maps, this area is predominantly a Black community with incomes well below the national median income. I'm sure you're starting to think about community conditions, access to different resources, or even educational levels. So I've added an additional map. This map shows the percentage of adults that have not completed high school. The darker areas have more adults without a high school diploma. And education is often directly linked to earning potential. Based on these maps, or based on this area, we can deduce that low-income Black communities have more adults that haven't completed high school and higher poverty rates. That can help put some framing around possible interventions your organization can do to support students living in this area. Let's wrap up. We don't have to overcomplicate things to get a common understanding. We just walk through 5 simple maps. We use these maps to narrow the issues, focusing in on the distribution of schools across the race and income landscape. We were able to identify Black and Brown communities and lower income areas within these communities. Now we're able to say, hey, here's where I want my organization to do the work, investing time, talent, and advocacy. to improve the outcomes of students living in low-income Black and Brown communities. Moving on, I'll hand it over to Chris to focus on community engagement.
All right. Thanks, Clinton and Koya. Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Messerich. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a solution engineer supporting the Racial Equity and Social Justice Unified team here at Esri. Today, I'd like to build upon the things that Koya and Clinton have discussed and focus on the center of the racial equity and social justice workflow, which is engaging communities and stakeholders. I'd like to show you how we can apply a geographic approach to a topic like environmental and climate justice, and how we can share our work with our stakeholders. Let's get started with some background on environmental justice. Historical practices and decisions like redlining or the placement of polluting facilities or the location of toxic waste sites places unjust environmental burdens on Black and Brown communities. Environmental injustice systematically impacts communities of color and low-income communities in the US and around the world. The organization has set up centers of innovation like the Climate and Environmental Justice Center to address the many decisions and practices that are harming communities of color, and you do this by influencing policy. To influence policy, you have to engage stakeholders in the community being affected by environmental injustice. By using GIS as an instrument of change, you can increase your understanding of community conditions and characteristics. As Clinton said, the racial equity and social justice workflow is cyclical and comprised of several stages: map and analyze equity, operationalize positive practices, manage performance, and at the center is engaging communities. Racial equity cannot be achieved in a vacuum, and you know this better than we do. So to ensure true equitable change, you must engage communities throughout the process and maintain alignment on mission, objectives, methodology, and outcomes of racial equity initiatives. In this example ArcGIS Hub site, we've included some examples of story maps related to environmental justice. Story mapping facilitates knowledge sharing of lived experiences to larger audiences that can affect change, create awareness, inspire lean thinking, and influence opinions. The story map on the left focuses on constituent engagement, and the story map on the right focuses on sharing and collaboration. So let's open the constituent engagement example and dive into a well-written story that utilizes maps, videos, images, and applications. This is an example of how an organization is managing the narrative around environmental racism. The story encourages the community to voice their support for a proposed congressional bill that will limit the environmental and health burdens associated with legacy pollution. So let's go to the disproportionate burden section and look at some cool examples. We'll start with this chart. The story uses powerful visuals and this chart shows the disproportionate burden of air pollution across the US for non-Hispanic, Black, or African-American people. This chart shows that non-Hispanic, Black, or African-American populations are experiencing higher levels of PM 2.5 than white people within the same state and across the US. So PM 2.5 refers to small particles floating in the air that can get through the lungs' defense systems, making PM 2.5 one of the most dangerous air pollutants for human health. Across the country, Black people share the disproportionate burden of air pollution and are 3 times more likely to die prematurely from exposure to fine particulate matter. Now let's look at the same data in a different way with maps. So these maps show where there are high levels of pollution of PM 2.5 and a high percentage of Black or African American people. It's amazing how quickly we can detect patterns using a side-by-side view, but what's even more exciting is how we can overlay this data. Now we're looking at where Black families live in relation to this dangerous pollution. This helps us better understand where environmental injustice is happening. Now let's zoom in and take a look at a single location like Newark, New Jersey. So Newark, New Jersey has been a locus for industrial and manufacturing activity. It also has large populations of people of color. and low income populations compared with the rest of the state. This map on the right is showing the intersection of air pollution and demographics. So dark blue areas show a high percentage of Black African Americans and high air pollution. Pink is showing high percentage of air pollution, but a low percentage of Black African Americans. Light blue is showing high percentage of Black or African Americans, but a low percentage of air pollution. And white is showing a low percentage of Black African Americans and low air pollution. Although New Jersey is 59% white, Newark sits at only 8% white, and this is largely a product of white flight. While more pollution was introduced to the city, wealthier white people were able to move, while Black and other communities of color did not have the luxury to do so. They were left to breathe, drink, and touch the myriad of toxins that spewed from the city's industries. So in addition to these really cool maps, the authors of this story have also included a section for policy solutions. So here they have included a link to the proposed bill so stakeholders and communities can read and understand what's being proposed. And at the end of this story, they've included a link that allows you to look up your Congress member to voice your support for the proposed bill. Stories like this can be used in a number of ways, such as gauging community sentiment and driving action around environmental justice litigation, thus building transparency between organizations and their communities. This concludes my demonstration. So now I'd like to pass it back to Koya so we can discuss operationalizing justice. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Now we're ready to move on to operationalizing positive practices for voter engagement. And here's how. This is a one-stop destination hub designed to improve voter participation through open communication and a sense of collaboration. It includes a set of tools to communicate key initiatives, get feedback, report on metrics, share authoritative information on projects, both internally and externally. Let's explore each of these components and how they come together. The Voter Engagement Hub is a responsive, accessible destination page for increasing awareness and communicating progress on focused initiatives. This takes the form of a hub. This template provides several placeholder sections, including describing the overall mission and showing leadership buy-in. Here, we highlight key focus areas like educating voters, increasing participation, promoting transparency, or possibly reporting on some metrics. In this section, we can add at-a-glance metrics to link to associated data sources and to increase reporting transparency. Voters can often seem disconnected from the voting process. We can help to improve user experiences by getting feedback and looking for ways to engage about the election process. Let's check out the voter satisfaction survey. We can use sentiment surveys to gauge how satisfied folks are around particular topics. In order to do that, we can ask them, where did they vote? What time did they vote? How long did they wait? What was the condition of the facility? Was the staff helpful? How easy was the process? And allow them to rate their overall experience. We can get information back from voters or respondents and say, how old are you? We can also add things like their race or gender. And we can allow them to lift up any concerns that wasn't covered by the survey. Let's hop back to the hub. We can use this section for highlighting voting issues relevant to our audience. Users can choose to follow the movement or subscribe for future updates. We can dedicate pages to educating voters around issues, lifting up topics important to your organization. Maybe it's criminal justice, environment and climate, reproductive rights, or an inclusive economy. We can use this section to help voters find appropriate information around a set of key topics. Let's say your organization has targeted goals around increased participation. We can dedicate pages to that goal. This page is dedicated to educating voters on where to vote and gives them the tools to locate a voting center or a polling place. If your organization wants to expand their initiative, dedicate a page to that. Explaining the process, identifying where folks can lean in. Let's wrap up. We just explored leveraging a voter engagement hub, educating voters, increasing participation and transparency around the voting process. Moving on, I'll turn it over to Chloe.
Hi, everyone. My name is Chloe Teraslinna. My pronouns are she and hers, and I'm a consultant at Esri with a focus on racial equity and social justice. Today, I would like to talk to you all about how Esri's consulting arm, which we call professional services, can help support all of the really impressive work that you're currently doing, as well as the work that you're about to do. So first off here, typically organizations will come to us and they want to address inequities in the communities that they serve. They see outcomes like the displacement of people in historically Black neighborhoods that indicate that inequities are present, and they want to understand how they can most effectively intervene. We would usually work with them to help them establish a framework around equity as well as some positive practices. But you're an organization that's really past that point with over 100 years of experience in that area. So as America's largest and oldest civil rights organization, the area we see NAACP continuing to benefit from the most would be in strategic guidance. So just continuing to support your strategy development and planning and technical consulting, which is work we've kind of laid the groundwork for with modernization around systems and technical guidance. And in this case, we'd really want to continue supporting you in developing your place-based approach to racial equity. So in the strategic guidance offering, this is where we would help organizations kind of define the problems that they want to solve or continue to solve, identify gaps in a breadth of topics. It could be anything like workforce capacity, resource allocations, and budgeting. And in our technical consulting offering, we develop specific solution architectures, data models, and apps. And this is where we just help implement the technology and infrastructure to better support your work now and in the future.
Hello, everybody. I'm Yumika Rushing, and I have the great honor to serve as the Chief Strategy Officer at the oldest civil rights organization in the country. And I'm pleased to moderate this important discussion on movement work. The NAACP and Esri have been working together to increase access to information and to advance racial justice. The partnership began with the donation of software to support census outreach efforts to communities of color. Since then, several successful collaborations have resulted in critical data and geographic insights. The Racial Equity 2020 Census Data Hub aimed to achieve a complete census count for communities of color. And the Roadmap to Reform project collected data on police budgets, providing insights for communities and policymakers to make more informed decisions. It was because of these watershed projects that Esri and the NAACP decided to join forces to unpack how to map the movement. Given the geographic scope of the NAACP's priority initiatives and the critical role that location plays in understanding community conditions, the NAACP and Esri recognize the need to harness the power and opportunity of location-based data and GIS to act and to guide structural change. The collective vision is to empower change makers with the tools and information to understand opportunities, to move resources, to measure progress and facilitate collaboration. Mapping the movement refers to the vision for place-based mapping that supports open data and citizen engagement, hotspot analysis and problem solving, mapping progress of racial justice, measuring change to improve strategy and impact, and visualizing issues in new and innovative ways. Today, we will hear from two dynamic leaders, Esri founder and president, Jack Dangerman, and NAACP president and CEO, Derrick Johnson. Jack and Derrick, it's a pleasure to welcome you.
Good, thank you, Yumika.
Yeah, thanks very much. GIS has emerged as an important aspect of movement work. It's about connecting people, illuminating what's working and what's not. And here's my first question to you both. How does putting things in the context of location help us to understand equity and inequity in this country?
So if you don't mind, Jack, Go ahead,
Derrick, why don't you go ahead?
Sure, sure. You know, the ability to map both people, assets, and data allow one to visualize opportunity, equity, and the lack thereof. For the NAACP and me personally, images really describe policy or policy opportunity. And if you can map a community, you can show certain demographics, and you can also show gaps. You can show barriers. You can show opportunities where public policy decisions can really drive resources necessary to make a community a healthy community. And for me, I describe a healthy community as how well we take care of our elderly, how well we are training and developing our youth for a future, and do we protect the rights of those who are disadvantaged, however we describe a disadvantage. Mapping that is something that would allow us to see gaps in access. It's also allow us to identify trends so that we can seize upon opportunities. But more importantly, it can allow communities to really get a picture of who they are and the value proposition that they represent.
Yeah, that's really great. And I appreciate both your understanding of this, Derrick, but also your vision of wanting to look at communities as a kind of ecosystem. One of my best friends is a biologist, and he's always talking to me about this idea of communities are also a kind of ecosystem. They're interdependent and interconnected. What happens here affects what happens there. And maps provide a kind of language that give us insight into that set of relationships and their patterns. And it's a language. That's what I think you're really trying to get across. It's a language of communities. And maps, dated back like 6,000 years. They were first just cave drawings and so forth. But as they evolved, civilization evolved. They kind of co-evolved. So as the field of mapping, now computer mapping, has emerged, we're seeing more spatial awareness. People are, for example, the COVID maps that were shown, everybody looked at the Johns Hopkins map and they saw what started in China spread around the world, and it was real. And people began to believe that COVID was really real as they saw it and they experienced it in this amazing way. And I think the same kind of lens can be had by looking at patterns and relationships, whether they be poverty issues or the issues that you talked about, health issues or racism issues. These are all very manifestable, if that's a word, in a map. And the amazing thing about this language, as opposed to written language or talking language, is that people immediately understand it. And while there's, I'm sure, the ability to tell lies and mistruths about, with maps, the reality is almost no one has ever done that. Maps are very credible, and so they speak the truth. People believe in them, and they're a kind of a cohesive way that we can strengthen communities. The other dimension about them is that maps are the language, but underneath the maps is this science of geography. And that is the science of our world, both physical geography, like mountains and streams, but also cultural geography, income, education, percentage of people in the labor force. All of those factors can be brought together using geographic thinking. And what I particularly am excited about in this partnership is this idea that we can approach solving these problems in communities using a kind of geographic approach. And I like this notion, as Clinton mentioned, the geographic approach allows us to integrate all the factors and kind of build a model, even visually, of how these things are interrelated and tell stories about them that are believable stories, and then target where we should locate something or target interventions, or, well, you can see I'm getting excited by this language. And but I'm particularly excited that you're excited, because this is the love of my life, and getting you guys to get it and like you're doing. It's not just a little pretty map on the screen. everything's about location, you know, everything happens someplace. And the idea that we can begin to cultivate a culture inside of NAACP of knowing and interrelating things and communicating. I just think there's a huge amount of benefit that can happen as a result of this awareness, building it into the organization and into the practices down deep. That's my, again, I'm a biased person, yes, you know, but it gets me very excited.
I think we definitely and certainly agree. And Jack, the work that Esri is doing is just extraordinary. In your recent Forbes article, you noted that the greatest challenges of our time include the climate crisis, as well as racial, social, and economic inequality. And they're inherently tied to geography. How does Esri work with communities? Can you give us some specific examples? And who is part of the global community of Esri users?
Sure. Well, let me just add one thing to what you're saying. For me, the biggest challenges of our time are our lack of understanding and also our inability to do collaboration. And what I'm talking about here is understanding even this ecosystem of interrelationships about communities. And this isn't just science talk, it's actually all of us. You know, people question because they don't fundamentally understand what it all is. And also they're unwilling to really collaborate with each other. But back to your question, I have about 10 million users. These are people that sign on to our software or use it, and they make billions of maps every day. The coronavirus map is probably the best example, but they're in cities, they're in utilities, they're in businesses. You know, where do we locate a Starbucks? Where do we locate a Walmart center? So they're all interested in this digital geography, as Clinton mentioned, being able to manipulate the geography to be able to use this knowledge to be able to pick the right location. Just about every city and every county and every state and here in the US, but also around the world, use our tools. And they do it for land use planning. They do it for taking the census, for example. They do it for mapping crime or issues that are associated with it. They understand sociology with it. There's a lot of academics that are heavily into this. And so this is a huge growing field. It's like the world is waking up to spatial awareness. And the opportunities are huge for young people to get engaged in this and embrace it. And I mean, the job potential here, I mean, it's just enormous. There's just thousands of job opportunities waiting for young people or people of all ages to get engaged and make a career out of this. So again, I'm sort of presenting my own interest. I'm interested in getting people in every segment of our society involved in this language, and then putting them into powerful positions so that they can play with this language to make a better world. Now, how we engage with communities is we of course are a commercial company. We sell our tools to just about everybody, but we also have an NGO, NPO program where we donate software. We have tens of thousands of organizations that are supported through this with free software and training that helps people get going. Particularly this is prevalent in schools. Under President Obama's administration, you know, he loves maps, by the way. When I first met him, I said, I have software that makes maps. He says, I love maps. Immediately we became friends. And we collaborated together on a program called Connect Ed at the time. It was to donate our software to every K through 12 school in the country. And that has really been, we've only got about 17,000 now, but together with National Geographic, we keep trying to push this idea of systemic education, spatial education in schools. But I hope that question answers your question.
Absolutely. Derrick, the opportunity is great. What does mapping the movement mean to you?
If you think about, for some of us been in elementary school and picture books, and how I would gravitate towards the picture books because it could tell the story. Well, mapping the movement can explain why barriers exist. It could highlight situations and trends. It can show overlapping interests between communities who otherwise may not see common interests, but you place something on a map that communities can see they have a common interest in cleaning up a particular area because it's causing harm to the environment or to people. It could define opportunities, such as think about the current infrastructure bill that was passed in Congress and how money should be applied, or it can really define how to optimize one's area. It could show trends, whether it's crime stats or positive trends in terms of student achievements. All of these things can be mapped. And it really is like that picture book. It tells the story of a community. And in terms of, you put that in movement speak, it can actually tell, it can define why there's a need for a movement, why there's a need to address equity, why there is a need to ensure that communities that are lacking certain assets, that are publicly funded, lacking certain assets, such as the grocery store, how all those things come together to really show the story of an individual city or county or a community. So mapping for me is something, it's like going to the library back in the time when we had encyclopedias. You know, it's a long gone thing now, right? Or the World Atlas. So you can kind of track and you can see over time how political boundary lines have moved in terms of nation states. Well, mapping also can show you how political boundary lines are moved to ensure democracy is equitable through the drawing of those political boundary lines we oftentimes call redistricting. All those things give us as an opportunity to build a movement that's more inclusive, that's more equitable, but more importantly, that's more accessible, because you can use data, and those of us who like to read data, that's good, but that's a smaller community. But if you put that data on a map and you put it in a picture book, it really identifies what is possible.
And as we think about what's possible, say a little bit more about how the NAACP works within and as a part of communities, and how will mapping the movement support your efforts?
Well, you know, the primary use have been up to this point really around the drafting of political boundary lines. I was trained as a GIS redistricting mapper because democracy started with access to voting. But even if you go to the poll and cast your vote, who are you voting for? What are the issues you're voting that you're supporting? And the lowest common denominator that really defines the outcome of any public policy opportunity is the political boundary lines that are drawn. That's called redistricting, and that now is done through GIS. I can recall, and I finished undergrad in early 90s, had a professor there, and he was a demographer. He was a career war veteran, so he was trained, he was an economist as well. And he was painstakingly draw by hand redistricting maps. It would take him a very long time, Senator Henry Kirksey. And I can recall learning that trade in his class in undergrad, going away to law school, and I came back, and what they seen was the new technology. That's like, we're not gonna go learn this new technology. We're drawing it by hand, and they send me away to learn how to draw maps. It was profound. Well, in that process on how to draw maps on a GIS system, I also began to realize that fire departments was using the mapping software to locate fire hydrants and map that out so that if people are in need, they have access to water. Then I started realizing that municipalities were using the map to identify their potential growth opportunities and all the assets of a municipality. Then I began to realize that the telecoms began to use it to identify where their wires were going underground and above ground, and how that connectivity could really define the emerging development. Or the power companies. All of those things become so important because the visualization of all those assets allow for the opportunity to create, almost like an artist, what society should look like. And so now for the NAACP, we step to the next iteration of GIS, how we use it. It's not only for the drawing of political boundary lines, but it's also engaging citizens so they can amplify their voice, whether through voting or showing up at meetings. It also gives us an opportunity to identify trends in terms of health determinative issues such as COVID and other issues that African Americans may be disproportionately impacted. It gives us an opportunity to understand environmental hazards that may be in proximity of communities and map that out so people can understand the hazards that may be at their front door that they didn't understand until you put it on a map. The potential of mapping in this moment is a wonderful potential because it allows for the lowering of the barrier for people to understand and access information in ways in which they can have a true voice and make a democracy work for all, to have the type of community that we dream of, and to really chart out what our future environment should look like.
And access is certainly key. And Jack, recognizing that so much policy analysis and so many policy decisions land on the desk of geographers and GIS professionals in roles like urban and city planners, what then is the importance of representation of Black people in that work and the focus on racial justice and disciplines like geography and urban planning?
Well, Black people are not in geography and urban planning very much, and that's very unfortunate. It's one of the big passions I have right now is to attract Black people into schools of geography and into the GIS field. And I'm hoping that this partnership really drives it because you are underrepresented. And that's not underrepresented by racism. It's sort of a de facto racism because there has not been exposure or there hasn't been training targeted to be able to recruit and get kids into it. So it's something I really want to work on. You know, Derrick, when you were talking, it just occurred to me that mapping and GIS are about describing what is in a community. And also it's about describing what could be.
What could be, yeah.
Designing, you know, and targeting, like you said, interventions, whether they're federal money and infrastructure or whatever it is, having the vocabulary of spatially targeting or spatially what could be is a kind of thinking that's so fundamental. So the geographic approach is very intuitive actually to all of us because we live in geography. The geographic approach brings all the factors together and also allows us to use all of those factors. I like to think of them like overlays and maps to look at the areas that are most suitable for certain things and what should not be. For example, putting a freeway through Black neighborhoods, it's the classic, conundrum that has ruined so many communities. And that's a geographic thing. On the other hand, targeting, just like Starbucks or these commercial companies do, targeting using all these factors to target the right place for intervention where we can do the most good. Again, I think everybody gets it. The idea of geography matters and location matters. And ultimately on people, location matters. Where you were born matters because the influences, all these factors, develop a kind of programming as a youthful person that stays with you your entire life. So if you're not exposed to, for example, national parks or open space or green, I'm a landscape architect, so I'm particularly biased in this area. Parks don't get into inner cities where a lot of Black people have had to grow up, for example. And okay, how can we intervene in that? But that means there's not the same value set. There's not the connection with nature often. And also based on where you're born, you're programmed to go to certain schools. And that, it's an old issue. Geography matters is basically a location matters. And having you as an institution embrace this language and use it to not just describe what is, but also what could be, is going to be a valuable tool. And yes.
I agree. This is just an awesome and powerful collaboration. And so I'll ask you both, how do you see the strengths of these two powerful mission-driven organizations coming together to affect change? Derrick?
Well, coming together to affect change is really important, because what Esri offer is the ability for African Americans, NAACP, and individuals who care about equity to draw into existence a better society, both figuratively and literally. You know, it is what Jack just mentioned, really mapping out what could be. And if you can do that in a way in which you have the technological tools, partnering with the local expertise of individuals who live in an environment, undergirded by the type of research that's necessary to understand what are some of the root causes of negative impact, but also the research to highlight some best practices, and you put that into a what I call a pot of gumbo and mix it up, it's the best type of flavor you can get, because it truly can allow one's aspirations to come to fruition. It can allow for communities who may not see themselves as a part of the collective whole to begin to see the collective opportunity by putting the picture of what's possible on the wall. Think about this. You grow up on one side of the track versus another, and you don't see each other as neighbors. But right in the middle of that track is a hazard. And that hazard is something that can have a negative impact on both sides of the track. All of a sudden, people can, if you map that properly, they learn how to work together. And what happens when they start working together? They slowly get to know each other. And what happens after that? They actually may like each other and break down the barriers that are artificial to start with. Or on the flip side, you have a community that enjoy a particular, I say 3 things bring people together more than anything else across communities. And that's food, that's music, and that's sports. And say they want to have something that they can celebrate one of all those things, and as a common interest, and everyone want to bring their unique community perspective to the table, and you map that out, and you find out that you have space within and between the community. Say, well, this is a way for us to maximize the space. That's bringing people together around something that's future forward, that they can fight forward together about it, around and with. Now we're strengthening the concept of neighbor. Now we're strengthening the concept of a democracy where everyone sees themselves as a part of a collective whole and not about a divided tribe, that set of divided tribes.
Jack, you mentioned that one of our greatest obstacles is that we don't collaborate enough. What can those listening do to be a part of mapping the movement, our movement?
I think learn is my first thought, is learn how to use this technology and learn how to use maps and think spatially. Ralph Nader first pointed this out to me like 4 decades ago. He said, Jack, you're building this great technology, but it's only for the elite, the elite people in the city planning department. But what about citizens? You need to reach out. In fact, he was the birthing of our NGO and NPO program. You need to equip everybody. And that means citizen groups, it means community organizations, so that they can stand up peer-to-peer. It's not just the sophisticated engineers that may present their beautiful drawings. No, we have these values, and then being able to overlay those values together, think of it as plastic overlay maps, so that you can represent and play at an equal level. In other words, you get the idea. You empower the communities to be able to have a voice, and this language is exquisite. Look, what I'm looking for is the NAACP and all of the different groups that you represent and are associated with begin to play with many of my users. My users are, 32,000 local governments, most state governments here in the U.S. And they're sophisticated, like Derrick was talking about, building the infrastructure layers, the sewers, the waters, the fire hydrants, the police departments, the planning department. They're all building those layers. But if we have another force that comes along and says, hey, here's who we are and here's what we represent and here's our values, it's not like being able to have a political voice. It's a matter of bringing your science and your thinking and the way it is for you measured by this data so that you can play and participate, because these people are good meaning. They want to have communities. They want to create a better future. So my big hope is that we can create a better future this way. We can have integrated communities. We can have understanding among different groups, and we can have collaboration. These two big dilemmas of our time, bring it together.
It's funny, Jack, when you say that, I'm listening, it's almost saying, using the tool so people can see themselves as owners of government and not victims of government.
Yes.
And when you bring up, that's right.
Participants in government, exactly right.
Participants in government. And when you mention Rav Nader, I can only imagine using mapping to prevent car accidents, but also using mapping to allow for togetherness.
Yes. Understanding.
Yes.
One of my friends is Richard Saul Wurman. I don't know if you ever met him, but he's the founder of TED, the TED Talks, and very interesting guy. He has this little phrase. He says, Jack, understanding precedes action. And he also said, what you're all about is creating a language for understanding, preceding action, of course. So if we can get people to really understand both sides of the railroad tracks, as to use your metaphor, Derrick, if people really understood the richness and they became friends, maybe mapping is a fourth dimension. It's not food, it's not sports, etc. It's mapping. It could be the common ground. It can, mapping common ground is the theme of my conference this year, and it's all about trying to get everybody together and looking at, we'll have like 25,000 people watching it. It's getting them to all participate in this idea of let's map common ground as a theme, and through that mapping exercise, we get connected and we create understanding. We create, understanding, which precedes better action. We need better action.
Yeah.
At this particular point in our history, we're in trouble. You look at overpopulation, climate change, loss of biodiversity, racial inequity, all of these things, drought, sea level, all of the interrelated aspects of our world, we're simply in trouble. And unless we get more understanding of all of this and also work on a collaboration language, it ain't going to work out.
Yeah.
That's a nice way to say it, so everybody's we're going to have to bring our best technology, our best science, our best community leadership, our best design thinking, our best creative work, if we're going to have a shot here. And polarization does not fit in that. Discussion fits in that. And so I'm very pleased, by the way, Derrick, to know you, privileged, I would say, in this relationship. I can't share enough about how pleased I am to join this new relationship and get going in this very important endeavor.
Yeah, no, same here. And I'm glad we at this juncture. So let's work, collaborate, and build together so we can be an example and a model.
Thank you. You can count on me.
Yeah.
I love that. And so what it means to be a GIS professional working in public service has evolved. It has changed. What it means to work in public service has evolved and changed. We need common ground. We need to be better at action. We need a language of understanding, a language of collaboration, and we need to be our best. I think those are our closing words, and it's been both insightful and engaging, gentlemen. I look forward to following the impact of this dynamic partnership. And thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Hello, my name is Tyler Sterling. I have the honor and privilege of serving as the NAACP's National Mobilization Director. You've just seen and heard some amazing real-life examples of utilizing mapping and data our communities and our leaders to see how we are directly impacted by laws, regulations, and policy decisions, thus giving us tools to run more effective mobilizations, be more intentional in our targeting, whether that's mapping out polling locations in a given jurisdiction to advocate for more accessibility for our communities, whether that's mapping the supporters of a specific piece of legislation who we're communicating with. These tools, resources, and technology are going to allow for us to visualize the impacts of policy and hopefully make showing up to vote, engaging in the electoral process, and part of the responsibility that we all have to see the changes for the communities that we hope.
Hello, everyone. My name is Anissa Rivera, and my pronouns are she, her, and I'm the program manager in the Chief Strategy Office at the NAACP. Thank you, Tyler, for giving us even more insight into how integral a place-based or geographic approach is in informing your important civic engagement strategy and mobilization efforts. From the analysis of hyper-localized environmental climate justice issues to understanding the broader impact of state-based policies that infringe on access to healthcare or censor the realities of America's past and current racist history in the classroom, place-based approaches inform the impactful interventions and solutions that support tenable and equitable change, community by community. After hearing from our leaders, NAACP Chief Strategy Officer, Ms. Yumika Rushing, NAACP President Derrick Johnson, and Esri President Jack Dangermond, and seeing the demonstration from the Esri team, I'm even more energized by the opportunities to harness and leverage place-based mapping to advance equity and racial justice throughout the nation. Earlier, President Dangermond said he likes to think of this geographic approach as exploring what is and what could be. And I have to say, I'm so excited that the NAACP and Esri will have a pivotal role in reimagining and building what can be. We are truly looking forward for what is to come as we continue our partnership with Esri and expand our place-based work to increase access to information, provide instrumental, actionable geographic insights to reduce disparities and advance racial justice. And we encourage you to be on the lookout for upcoming trainings, webinars, informational resources, and additional opportunities in the coming weeks and months. Without further ado, I'm happy to introduce Mr. Jamal Watkins, NAACP's Senior Vice President of Strategy and Advancement, to deliver the final closing remarks of the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Anissa. The power of mapping, given that the world around us seems to be on fire, is critical. If we can continue to inspire and empower our community members to wake up to the power of geography, the science of integration, and leveraging the framework to create a better future, in fact, mapping the future we want to see, then we win in the end. We know that all of the work that we're putting into this effort is truly about benefiting the communities that we live in and the families and the people and our neighbors that we serve. So when we think about getting involved, if you are not a member of the NAACP or you want to figure out how to get plugged in, please visit our website at naacp.org. And if you find that there isn't an NAACP near you, we actually have the tools and the support team to be able to work with you to build your own NAACP movement, which is hyperlocal. And if you want to know more about GIS, that big scary word for some folks, which is really about place-based mapping, please visit esri.com. Because at the end of the day, the power is in your hands. If you have a mobile phone or a smart device, I'm sure you use mapping technology at some point over the last few months. And so we want to make sure that we continue to leverage and harness this new technology, emerging technologies, and existing technologies to make sure that we are able to shape the communities we want to see. Thank you, thank you, thank you.